What's up, you guys? It's Marty. Welcome back to this two-part series about the topic of essentially why I took a year off of PA school. So kind of just a quick recap of the first video. In my first year of didactic school, I struggled immensely. Just the amount of knowledge, the fast-paced nature, and everything that we know about medical training being so challenging just really took a toll on me personally, and I came to the conclusion that I needed to take a leave of absence. So if you haven't seen the first video, please go back and take a look at that. So I kind of want to pick up where I left off. So again, going into this year off posed a lot of challenges, a lot of risks. You know, how would I ensure that I would come back from PA school? And I had planned to take an entire year off, so I finished my didactic year in May, and I was going to take the entire year off until the following May. How would I ensure that I would be competent when I did come back going into my clinical year, that I had mastered and retained all of the information that you need to go into your clinical year and be successful? So I had to come up with a plan. And before I talk about how I approached my year off and my leave of absence, I think it's always great to think about how when I finished my last test during my didactic year, it was such an amazing interesting, I should say, feeling, because up until that point, again, it had been a marathon where I wake up every single day, study, go to class, take a test, go home, study, just thinking about surviving until the next day. And then, when it finally came to the point where I was taking my last exam during didactic year, and I finished and I left lecture hall, and it was a beautiful spring day in Madison, and it was just this feeling of just like I finally take like a sigh of relief for the first time, knowing that there wasn't any pressing deadline or anything that I had to go home and prepare for. So, and I remember too, like I lived off campus, and I decided just to walk home and just enjoy the moment, enjoy the ability just to, go for a walk and not have to think about the next thing. So, but anyway, so again, I knew that I had to have a very structured plan for my year off. I knew that, if I just went into it kind of day by day, that, I would probably not study as much as I should. So I came up with a very detailed plan where I essentially revisited the entire curriculum in its entirety twice. So in PA school, in the didactic year, we learn systems-based, so cardiology, pulmonology, gastroenterology. So I wrote the curriculum out for the entire year, so I knew in July I would be going back and diving into ENT, and then in August I would be revisiting dermatology. So I made an entire curriculum for the entire year. So I kind of looked back to all of my lectures and everything that I'd already done, and I essentially scheduled lectures out for the entire year. And that was nice because every single day then throughout that year I woke up and I knew it had to be accomplished, as opposed to just like waking up and deciding like, okay, what should I study today? So I knew I had to have a very defined plan to hold myself accountable and make sure that I was using this time off, this leave of absence for a year, using it to its fullest capacity to prepare myself for going back and being successful in clinical year and beyond in my career. So I took a whole week to build that curriculum, and it was actually really fun. And I was able to structure it in a way that kind of made more sense for me. Like, for example, in my program, we started with like anatomy and physiology, and then we did like a history and physical exam class in the summer. And the thing that was hard about that is, it was kind of disjointed from, let's say like we did, anatomy on the heart, and then we did the physical exam skills for the cardiology. Like it being so disjointed throughout the year made it a little bit more challenging. But in my year off, I was able to take all of those lectures and kind of put them together, which was nice. So that was another thing. I was able to organize the curriculum in a way that allowed me just to get more out of it. So that was also a nice benefit of designing the curriculum for myself. So the next thing that was really important too, and again, one of the biggest challenges of medical training, PA training, nurse training, it's just a ton of information that you have to retain. And medical research is constantly evolving and expanding to the point where it's kind of like, it's insurmountable to expect one person to be able to retain all the information there is regarding medical sciences. And, to some extent we see that, right? Like medicine has become so subspecialized. We're very much getting away from the models of a generalist. Back in the day, you had a physician that did everything. And then, even comparing it to, like 30, 40 years ago, you had, it was way more common. Not that we still don't have family medicine practitioners today, but that was kind of the model, you had a family doctor that saw you from when you were a child to, throughout your life. And if you ever needed to be hospitalized, they would admit you to the hospital and everything. But today, medicine is becoming so subspecialized because, medical advancement, and we just learn so much. So it's such a challenge in your training because, PA training, medical training, it's still the same amount of time. Like we still go to PA school for essentially 2 years, and, 30 years ago, the first PAs went to PA school for 2 years, and not that there wasn't a lot to learn then, but there's just so much more to learn now, again, given all the advancements in medicine. So my classic approach, I think my entire life, and I think this is probably the style that most people approach any type of academic curriculum, making flashcards, making study guides, printing out the, PowerPoint slides, and writing all these notes from kind of top to bottom. That's essentially what my approach was when I went to PA school in my first year. And while that had suited me, my entire life, I quickly realized that approach to the PA curriculum was not going to work. Because when I think about it, study cards, flashcards, study guides, those are great for studying for tests and learning a ton of information that you retain only for a short period of time. But thinking about what is the goal of medical training, you need to know this so that you can apply it in your practice and clinical year, in your career. So I knew that I had to also figure out another way to approach the curriculum. And what I decided was, instead of, taking a bunch of unorganized notes, I would create like a catalog, a database of everything that I learned in my didactic year. And so what I did, I created a big Excel spreadsheet, essentially, where I cataloged all the information from my lectures in an organized way. And my plan is to make like another video that kind of explain this whole Excel sheet and everything, because to this day I still use it. I call it my PA Bible, and there's probably not a shift that goes by where I'm not looking at some part of it, because again, getting back to medical knowledge and everything, it's so stressful to try to retain all of it. And you learn something in PA school and you're like, okay, I need to remember this because I need this for like next year. But then you're like moving on to the next topic and you're trying to retain that just massive amount of energy, and then that you're already forgetting the things that you told yourself you needed to remember, and it's very stressful. But the nice thing about, an Excel sheet or a medical database is you know that you are cataloging this information somewhere that you can go and essentially use at a later date. But it's nice because in your mind you're like, okay, I know I've learned this, I know I've written down bullet points in a way that makes sense for me, and I know that it's cataloged, saved somewhere, and it's easily accessible at, when I need it. So that was another big way to kind of take off the burden and stress of didactic training, just trying to retain all of that information. So I want to make a video kind of about this whole spreadsheet in and of itself, but essentially, long story short, I made essentially a tab for each of the systems of medicine. So I had like a cardiology tab, pulmonology, GI, dermatology, et cetera, and it was essentially 4 columns. So the first column was like the medical condition, so like high blood pressure. The next column would be signs, symptoms, diagnostic testing. In a second column, the third column would be kind of the pathophysiology behind the medical condition. And then the fourth column would be like treatment and prognosis. And again, I had one for each system of medicine. And as I went through every lecture, I kind of made, again, for every medical condition, kind of all of the bullet points for each of those 4 columns. And it was really great. And over, a year's time, this grew into a very large Excel sheet, as you can imagine, almost like a very in-depth bullet point, like medical database. And the nice thing about this is I created it. All the information that was in there was done in a way that made sense for me and were the bullet points that I needed, and it was organized in a way that just makes sense for how I retain knowledge and everything. So it was just this very invaluable database that I had to use to go into my clinical year. The nice thing about it as well is, talking about how I use this still every single day. So like I still, being a practitioner, like the learning never ends. And again, medical research, medicine is always evolving. How we, treated, again, high blood pressure like 10 years ago is completely different than how we treat it today. There's always like new medications and therapies and whatnot. So the nice thing is I have this database that when I could do continual medical education, I can go back and I can change it and add to it. So it's just this great tool that keeps growing as I grow in my career, which has turned out to be fantastic. And the other thing that's really nice about it too is, as opposed to flashcards and study guides, when I would make those in my first year, oftentimes like these would end up in the garbage or in a folder that I would never use ever again because, thinking about, having to go back to find an answer in those study guides for something that I had a question on maybe in my clinical year, like there'd be no way for me to go through just piles and piles of unorganized flashcards and everything to try to find, okay, where did I make that note about this on this lecture? Like that's just not very practical. As opposed to an Excel document that you can easily Control F and go right to, the column in the cell where you have all of your bullet points about what you learned exactly about a specific medical condition. I can't say how helpful that was in my clinical year. And I will say also it was very interesting for my clinical preceptors to go and actually look at this document that I had created and look at what we were taught and how that may differ from what they do in their clinical practice, because there's always a lot of gray area in medicine, and again, things are always changing, and what we learn in our medical training is sometimes a few years out of date, sometimes a decade or two, but that's just the nature of medical training. So it also was a great, again, conversation starter and everything with my clinical preceptors, kind of comparing what we're taught and then what actually happens in clinical practice. So that was just an invaluable way also to approach the curriculum in this year off. And in addition to making a tab for each of the systems, I also made tabs for physical exam. So, what we learn in PA school is also how to do a physical exam. So ENT exam, cardiology exam, pulmonology exam, GI. So, and you learn like these specific tests and these specific names for certain tests. And when you go out into your clinical year and stuff, again, you're expected to know these things. So it's nice if you have a preceptor like, hey, I want you to go do like a really in-depth neuro exam on a patient. I had a tab in this PA Bible, in this Excel sheet, that had a detailed head-to-toe exam for a neurological exam that I was easily able to go and look at the bullet points, as opposed to having to, find a medical textbook or find that PowerPoint slide in a lecture from my didactic year where it kind of went through all of that. So again, just an invaluable tool to have in my clinical year, to have everything organized like that. So I made one for each of the physical exam areas, and then I also had one for labs. So you learn a lot of different lab tests, CBC, chem panel, thyroid tests, urine studies. So as I would learn about different diagnostic tests, I would add them to my my lab sheet, and I kind of had it alphabetized, and I would go over like kind of normal ranges, which is always going to differ based on each lab, but essentially would have like normal values, and then if there was abnormal values, what were like, I would list out like different types of medical conditions that could account for those lab abnormalities, and kind of how we approached each of those things. So it was nice to have a separate lab test, or a lab sheet that went just specifically into various lab tests. And again, I want to make a video to kind of go over all of this so you can kind of see it in real time. And then what I started to do on my year off, and this kind of went into my clinical year, I made specific sheets for chief complaints. So I think it's like this interesting 180 that happens between didactic year and clinical year. So in didactic year, you learn everything based on systems. So you learn about like high blood pressure, and you learn about diabetes, and you learn about osteoporosis. But when you get into the real world, it's not like people come and like, hey, it's diabetes day and everyone's coming in for diabetes. Like, at least in urgent care, people are coming in with like specific complaints that you have to figure out. Like, I'm here for chest pain, I'm here for a headache, I'm here for, urinary frequency. And so part of what happens in clinical year is you start building what we call differential diagnosis. These are a list of things that you would consider based on someone's problem, their chief complaint. And so I also had tabs, I keep saying tabs, but sheets in my master Excel document for common chief complaints. So I have one for chest pain and shortness of breath and abdominal pain and headache and GI bleed, and again, kind of listing out all of the potential things that should be considered for each of those chief complaints, and then having a tab for how I would approach this patient diagnostically, and kind of bullet points for treatments and everything. And something that's cool about Excel is you can link to different parts of the spreadsheet. So let's say under like the differential for chest pain, I had an MI. I could link that to the cardiology sheet under all of my notes for my myocardial infarction. So it was just a really great way to organize all of the information in a way that was easily accessible. Being able to pull up this document like on my phone or easily on any computer, via the cloud. It was just such a great resource to have. So really glad that I figured that out before going into my year of my leave of absence, because I do think if I would have just approached the year off as I did in my didactic year, I think I just would have struggled in a lot of the same ways. Now, I knew that I still had to take tests, and that it was great having a way to catalog all of the information, but at the end of the day, I still had to figure out a way to pass tests. And I will say, like, even cataloging the information still made it an easy way to like create a study guide from it and just read through my bullet points. But I did also again take like practice exams. And the nice thing about the nice thing about PA training, there's a million companies that are offering like different various like board prep and everything. So usually after every system that I reviewed, I would take like a practice test for cardiology or pulmonology and whatnot. And then I was also preparing for my boards, doing a lot of like the PANS prep tests that are available too. Again, just to get into the practice of, you know, answering questions within that 60-second time frame and just getting used to sitting for periods of time, taking tests. Because, you know, while I appreciated that, you know, how I approached the curriculum in my year off actually prepared me more for practicing medicine, as opposed to, you know, what I feel like happens in didactic year often where you just study to take tests. I still knew that, again, you know, part of PA training is showing competency by, you know, taking tests. So in addition to, you know, approaching the curriculum and cataloging the information I did, I also knew that it was important to still make sure that I was studying in a way that would help me be successful for taking my end of rotation exams in my clinical year, and then also taking my boards. So that's essentially, again, kind of a synopsis of my year off. Again, this video is getting a little bit long, so I think I'll leave it at that, but I think a lot of people have questions about this PA Bible and how it being a potential way for people to approach what is a very overwhelming curriculum in PA school. So I think that'll be the next video I make, is bringing up my PA Bible and showing it to you all. You know, like I said, to this day I use it almost every single shift, and my physician colleagues and my PA colleagues and my MP colleagues are always asking me, like, hey Marty, what do you have in your PA Bible for this? And I have a patient with this. Did you have anything in there? And so I think it's a solid way to study in PA school. So with that, thanks again for checking out part 2 of this series about my year of absence from PA school. Again, if you can give me a like, I would really appreciate that. I put a lot of heart and soul into making these videos, and I want to create more content to help everyone who is already in their training or deciding on if they want to pursue a career in healthcare. Just because, again, I don't want people to have to go through the same struggles that I've gone through. So I just want to make content that helps everyone just be the best student and get the most out of school and just have the best career that they can. So if you can give me a like, that would be great. And then also check out the links to my website. And I mentioned in my last video, a year ago I authored a book that's available on Amazon called Becoming a PAC, Your 10-Step Guide to America's #1 Profession. So check that out as well. And with that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, your night, your week, and I will talk to you guys soon.